Cutting through marketing hype and BS. By that I mean bum scoop, bad intel, as we might say in the military vernacular. Especially in the world of ballistics, there is a lot of marketing hype and just bad information in the world of ballistics. Let's try and get some soap and hot water on that today and clean that junk off and look at what the actual numbers are. So that's what we're going to talk about today on Gunfighter Life, where we talk about guns and gunfighting the right way with Almighty God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, meaning no bribes, no getting paid off by some company trying to push some new caliber or some new widget or some new thing. But looking at things with Judeo-Christian values, one such, you shall not have in your bag differing weights, a heavy and a light. You shall not have in your house differing measures, a large and a small. You shall have a perfect and a just weight and a perfect and a just measure. And real-world first-hand experience. I'm going to put in a bio here so you get where I'm coming from with real-world first-hand experience. If you've heard it before or you don't care, click through it. But I've been putting it in less, but I'm going to put it in today's episode because I think it's germane. If you want to skip it, skip around 2 minutes on the fast forward buttons or whatever it is. And then we'll get into the main topic. I'll roll into a quick abbreviated bio and then into the main topic. First and foremost, I am a Christian. I don't apologize for that. God is number one in my life. I grew up hunting and fishing in the backwoods of the southeastern United States at a very early age. Some of my earliest memories are with firearms. I joined the Marine Corps at 17, did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. By God's grace, He got me through that safely. After that, I served as a instructor, an urban warfare instructor and a desert warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps. I also served with the L.A.P.D, both full-time as a sworn police officer and in some more specialized assignments, as well as serving in the U.S. Army, full-time and part-time National Guard. I've been a F.B.I. firearms instructor, still am an F.B.I. firearms instructor, have been for a lot of years, also N.R.A. certified and some other 3-letter government agency certified. I've been a private contractor for a 3-letter government agency I won't specify. I've been the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area. By God's grace, He got me through all that in one piece, not because I'm better, but because He chose to have grace and mercy on me. I've been a professional hunter and guide. Professionally hunted things like buffalo and elk. Not many people today can say they've done that, but I'm blessed to be able to say that I have. I've hunted everything from white-tailed deer on the East Coast to mule deer on the West Coast to gray squirrel on the East Coast to prairie dog on the West Coast, and elk and bear and wolf, and slain all manner of beast. A state rifle and pistol champion a few times over in a few different disciplines. Enough about me, guys. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and fingers for battle. Let's get into today's topic. Alright, so cutting through the ballistic hype, the marketing hype. First of all, I want to be fair and honest. By the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, a matter is established. Double check my numbers. I could make mistakes. I could make mistakes on math. I could make mistakes fat fingering something in the ballistics calculator or looking up something wrong. So take what I say and double check it. By the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, a matter is established. But this recently came up in a Patreon chat. If you don't know, we have an insider chat. We talk all the time, and it's unlike here where you're just listening. It's a two-way. They can ask me questions. Hey, what about this? What about that? And the topic of ballistics came up, and one of the guys in the chat, I don't know if he wants to be mentioned, but he was really surprised at the lack of difference in different calibers. And we're talking about our favorite calibers. For today's discussion, just for an idea of how to cut through ballistic marketing and hype, let's talk about deer hunting. Although you can hunt many things, and I've been blessed to hunt many things, let's talk about deer. Deer and deer size game, right? Whether that be whitetail mule deer, blacktail deer, pronghorn, something in that size weight range. Medium to large game. And let's talk about what I would consider reasonable ranges. And before you get off on the long range hunting thing, if you want to do that, that's fine. That's not how I hunt. I have taken longer shots in the past, but in general, spot and stalk and still hunting and most other kinds of hunting, especially on the East Coast, when is the last time not you heard somebody did it or you want to be able to do it, but you shot a deer or even saw a deer more than 2 football fields away and were legally able to take it more than 200 yards away? For today's discussion, let's keep those parameters. Deer size game, we'll mainly focus on like 200 yards and in. And I like a 50-yard zero. I think the 100-meter zero is really antiquated. It works pretty good if you're doing a 30-30 or a 45-70 or something without modern decent ballistics. But when you get to modern decent ballistics, and I mean modern by like 100, 120 years, with Spitzer-type bullets and bottlenecked cartridges, I think you'll get to see how much of this is hype. Comparing something as vanilla as the .308 Winchester to the .300 Winchester Magnum. Okay, so looking at that with a 50-yard zero, .308, a good rule of thumb and a good vanilla load is 150 grain at 2800. I just pulled up a factory load on the Federal Ballistics calculator. For most of these, I tried to use Federal Fusion because it's a good vanilla load. It's a good plain load, nothing spicy, but it lists 150 grain at 2820. Federal Fusion, and it lists with a 50-yard zero, 200 yards minus 3 inches. With a 300 Win Mag, which is 3,200 feet a second with the same 150 grain Federal Fusion bullet. 150 grains at 3,200, screaming fast. We zero it at the same 50 yards. You're dealing with minus 1.3. Does it have less drop at 200 yards? Yeah, it does. Less than 2 inches difference. Now, if you're a man and you measure stuff roughly, you've probably figured out how much an inch is in relationship to your thumb or part of your hand when you're using to measure stuff. Picture less than 2 inches, right, in field conditions on a deer-sized target. Less than 2 inches at 200 yards. All right, here's something to consider. A .308 at 200 yards is plenty to kill any deer. It's not more dead because you shot it with a 300 Win Mag. There are some calibers, I'll be honest, when you start stepping down, where a bigger, heavier bullet will open up some more shot angles and opportunities. But there's really no shot angle other than straight away from me that I wouldn't take with a .308 on deer-sized game at 200 yards. And I wouldn't take the straightaway shot even with a 300 Win Mag. So, really, cut through the marketing hype. So, practically, what is the difference? What are you gaining? You're gaining less than 2 inches in drop at 200 yards. But what are you also getting going from the .308 to the 300 Win Mag? You're getting a lot less efficiency. You're getting a lot more powder, which gives you a lot more ejecta mass, which gives you a lot more recoil. I mean, considerably more recoil. Also, you're probably going to a bigger, heavier rifle because it's a longer action, and generally, they're just heavier rifles. In general, there are exceptions. You're getting all that. You're getting more expense, which means you're probably going to practice less, mostly because of the recoil and the expense. I was just out practicing today with some hunting rifles, and I shot I don't know how many rounds of .308. Probably wouldn't have shot that with 300 Win Mag. Why? Because I don't like pain. And it's expensive. So you're giving all that up, and what are you gaining for that, for deer inside of 200 yards? Really? So, again, cut through the marketing hype. Am I saying that .308 is just as powerful as 300 Win Mag? No, I'm not saying that at all. Am I saying that it doesn't have some advantages in some situations, like grizzly bear or very extended ranges on larger game? No, I'm not saying that at all, but I'm saying for deer hunting inside 200 yards, what are you doing? Are you getting the 300 Win Mag because it's just what you have, which is fine? Or are you doing it because you think somehow it's better? Or do you think it's better just because it's more? Because more is not always better. An animal that is dead because you made a good chest cavity shot with a 308, 150 grain bonded bullet at 125 yards. I'm just picking a random distance. It's not any more dead because you shot it the same way with a 300 Win Mag. It just doesn't work that way. Now, let's look at what some would consider underpowered, but was what was and is one of my favorite all-time deer loads. And when I was a professional hunter and guide, one of the most common, if not the most common, I don't have hard numbers on that, but I remember more 243s than any other caliber. The next would have been .6 among us professional hunters and guides, but part of that might be because, like, when you have a certain model of car and you drive down the road, you just notice it because that's the car that you have. And I had a 243. It wasn't the only thing that I hunted with, but for years and years before I became a professional hunter and guide, it was my go-to. And I noticed how many hunters and guides use a 243, and it was significant. Now let's talk about that caliber, which most would consider underpowered. And it's a 95 grain bullet, Federal Fusion, and it's not even my favorite load, not even by far, but it was just Federal Fusion, same bullet. I tried to keep it, again, as fair a comparison as I could make. 50 yards, 0. 200 yards, minus 2.3. It was right in the middle. It's in the middle as far as drop goes between the 308, 150 grain, and the 300 Win Mag. Again, it's in the middle. Now, with this versus the 308, because the 308 is so popular, it's probably going to be about the same price. If anything, the 308 may be a little bit cheaper. But you're getting less recoil even than the 308. So it really shines in a lightweight rifle. Also, you're getting a little bit less drop than the 308, but not enough to really make any difference at all. You're getting less drop than the 300 Win Mag. You're certainly getting less recoil and less expense. And for deer size game, now this is where the other bigger calibers are better for other things. But for a deer inside of 200 yards, especially inside 100 yards, if you have a decent bullet and I stress decent bullet because there are a lot of, the 243 is a great crossover round. It's great for varmints and great for deer. Excluding the varmint bullets, right? If you're talking about a good deer bullet, like a bonded, good bullet for the 243, if you make a good shot with a 243, is a good shot. And it should be plenty enough for any deer. Up to the biggest northern whitetail. At those ranges. At extended ranges, you start getting questionable. On bigger size game, and I have taken elk with a 243, I would not advise it unless you're really precise with your shots. But if you're talking bigger game, then yeah, there are advantages to bigger calibers. But for this argument, we're talking deer. Deer inside of 200 yards, 243, there's a reason it's real popular. It'll get the job done without the extra expense, without the extra recoil. Very manageable, very pleasant to shoot. Talk about going out and practicing and having fun with it. A great caliber. Let's look at the 6.5 Creedmoor. And I actually like the 6.5 Creedmoor, but it's touted as this crazy long-range, uber-modern cartridge. We just talked about the 243. Let's look at the 6.5 Creed. The 6.5 Creed is zeroed for 50 yards with a Federal Fusion bullet. I believe 140 grain. It's got a drop of minus 3.5 inches. Wait, what? That's the worst drop we've discussed so far. It drops more than the other calibers. Well, how is it such a good long-range caliber? Again, cut through the ballistic hype and the marketing. It's a good, super long-range caliber. We're talking out past 800 yards than the 308 because it has a higher ballistics coefficient. It's got long, heavy for caliber bullets, which means, especially with the powder capacity of that size case, it's going to drop more. Which, if you're talking about deer inside of 200 yards, is not an advantage at all. In fact, it's the worst of the bunch. Not that it's a bad deer caliber inside 200 yards. Actually, my go-to guide rifle is a very lightweight mountain rifle in 6.5 Creedmoor that I like to shoot at reasonable ranges, and it's a fine caliber for that. The fact that it drops an extra half inch over the 308, I don't really care. But as much as it's touted for the super long range, you're talking at deer inside of 200 yards, it drops more than the 308, and you're dealing with a lighter bullet. So you're getting less energy, more drop at 200 yards than you are with the 308. We're talking like point blank ranges here, not dialing for dope, not calling wind, not having a backpack full of electronics and fancy computerized widgets and all kinds of things that you need all that infrastructure for and all that stuff. And if that's how you like to hunt, that's fine. But that ain't me. You get how you might be lulled into the marketing thinking that this is somehow a better caliber. And if you're shooting uber long range, like you're shooting, if you look at the numbers out past 800 yards between the 308 and the 6.5, and you're just banging a steel plate that doesn't move and doesn't react running up and down a hill after you've shot it or whatever, for that it's good, and that's one of the reasons it was invented for that, and it does well for that. Banging steel at 1,000 yards. For hunting deer, it's a fine deer caliber inside of 200 yards, but it's no better than 308. It's a lighter bullet, less energy. Now, granted, it's got a higher sectional density. BC is irrelevant at the distances we're talking about. Between modern Spitzer bullets, really, as far as, anything but an academic difference in the numbers. If you make a good shot on a deer-sized animal, 200 yards and in, with a 6.5 or a 308, as long as the bullet construction is good on both, I don't think you're going to notice a difference. And here's where things get interesting. If you remember some of the numbers we talked about. Now, going back to the 308, if there ever was a vanilla round, a vanilla load, that is by far the most common. And it's a great round. But don't be lulled into thinking that it's somehow inferior because there's a bunch of new rounds. Or somehow because you're still hunting with a 308 and all the other guys have moved on to some other crazy cool caliber, that the deer are just going to laugh at you because you're hunting with a 308 or you're somehow behind the curve. If you know about ballistics, and this I try to stick with a factory load, it's not going to be a Federal Fusion because it's, I think, lighter, but let's say you're hunting whitetail deer. You want a little bit flatter trajectory, better point blank range. Go back to that 308 and load it with a 125 grain bullet. Or a 110 grain bullet of proper construction. 50 yard zero, you're talking minus 1.3. Minus 1.3, if you remember, that's the same exact drop that we got with the 300 Win Mag at 200 yards. Identically, and I didn't plan that out, it's just what it worked out to be. And yeah, you're getting a slightly lighter bullet, but again, 110 grain on a whitetail deer, let's just pick 125 yards. If you did your part and got a good shot and that bullet is made of the proper thing, not a varmint bullet, and you know your shot placement, it's a dead deer. And you did it with a 308 with the same ballistics drop as a 300 Win Mag. Again, without the recoil and cost and everything associated with that. And it's one of the reasons, now this was a factory load, probably harder to find, but one of the reasons why hand loading can really open up some doors. Now, thus far, we've been using a Federal ballistics calculator, and not because I'm sponsored by Federal or because of anything. I just picked it. You could use a Hornady ballistics calculator and do the same thing, or whomever else has it. For reloading stuff, I'm going to use Ogden. And not because I'm sponsored by Ogden, but because they actually, I think, without being paid, I think they have the best user-friendly online resource for ballistics reloading data. And let's say we want to go a little bit heavier, and this is a similar load to what I used to load, and that's solid copper. Whether you have to use it or not is sometimes a really, really good choice. Let's stick with the vanilla 308. It's a good cartridge. You go to 130 grain solid copper, which performs by completely different rules and will penetrate deep and is a great choice for any deer-sized animal. 130 grain. There are other brands, but Barnes, TSX, TTSX, whatever, in a 308 Now, this is published data. The first load I'm looking at the end of the spectrum here, and I'm not going to give you out load data, but this is from the Ogden site. It lists a velocity of just over 3,200 feet a second. That's 130 grain at over 3,200 feet a second. If you remember, our original 300 Win Mag load was a 150 at 3,200. And coppers, solid coppers, again, they perform by different rules. I would rather have that load in a solid copper 130 grain than 150 grain of some kind of bargain basement load, especially at those kind of velocities, because a lot of times when you get those screaming velocities, that older bullet technology, they're just cup and core non-bonded, which is what a lot of people might just hunt with, because especially with the 300 Win Mag, it's what they can afford, what they're willing to spend. Might be better off with a 308 with solid copper, reloading it. I think the performance out of that solid copper at 3,200 is going to be better than the performance of a regular cup and core 150 grain out of a 300 Win Mag. And you could argue with that, but again, this is my training and experience. Your personal experience may differ. But that solid copper is going to stay together better. It's going to drive deep. It's going to punch deep. And you're doing all that with way less recoil, way less powder, way less ejecta-mass, probably a lighter rifle, probably more affordable. And this is not a knock on the 300 Win Mag. This is not a thing fanboying for the 308. I'm not married to the 308. I've got many other calibers. Could have just as easily done 30-06. And in some ways, 30-06 is more flexible, especially when you talk about heavier bullets. And I'm not saying you should... This is not just for people hunting deer at reasonable ranges. The whole point of this is to get you thinking about, let go of the garbage marketing hype, thinking that you need this or you need that, and look at the numbers and look at the actual physics and the math and think about what you really need. Not what somebody's telling you you need. What do you really need? What actually makes a difference? And this is coming from the Patreon chat, and this, again, do your own research and everything, but from my experience in training, I think I've seen more wounded deer-sized game with big magnums than anything else from clients. And that's not because the magnum doesn't have more power. It certainly does. And all I can do is pontificate. These are different clients, different deer. I've hunted many exotic deer too, like fallow deer and things like that when I was guiding. Now, again, here are some of my theories as to why. Again, this is all coming out of the Patreon chat and trying to help people with different things. Non-confident shooters, thinking a more powerful round is going to make up for wherever shot placement. Like, if I just put it somewhere in the middle of the animal, I've got a 300 Win Mag or a 300 Rum or a 338 Win Mag. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to put it somewhere towards the middle. And they shoot it in the gut or the paunch or somewhere not acceptable. And I don't care how big a magnum it is, shy of a 50 cal, BMG, which is a ridiculous thing to hunt with, right? It doesn't matter. You shoot something in the paunch, in the gut, with a 300 Win Mag or a 338 Win Mag, even bigger, that's worse than if you had shot it in a good place with a 243. So that's one theory. People just, they're not confident shooters, so they think, I'm just going to aim for the middle. I've got a magnum. It's going to drop it. But experience has shown me otherwise. Theory 2, similar. Maybe they just think that because they have a magnum, they have a bigger acceptable area in which they can shoot. And that might be true for some animals, right? Like if you're trying to punch through the shoulder bone or the scapula of an elk or a moose, having that, a lot of times, heavier bullet at decent velocities can smash through where a lighter caliber cannot. Talking about situations where it makes a difference, right? There are few shot angles that I would accept on an elk with a 243, and I've taken elk with a 243. I limit my shot angles. There are many more shot angles that I would take with a bigger, heavier caliber. I would not advise a quartering away shot or a quartering two shot with it. I would like to keep it to a straight broadside shot. If I'm trying to punch through something like a front shoulder, I'm much more comfortable doing that with a bigger caliber. But if you, again, going back to theory 2, if you think that deer size game, that the fact that you have a Magnum gives you a bigger acceptable shooting area on that deer, I beg to differ. Any of the calibers we talked about is probably going to punch through a shoulder. Even big, heavy calibers can turn and do weird things if you hit them at just the right angle. I don't think that's more common anyway, I think that is a fallacy, that if that is in fact what people are thinking. Theory 3, and I think this actually may be I believe this theory is probably the bulk of it. Shooting with such high recoiling rounds makes them flinch and therefore makes marksmanship suffer. Like, there is a point where shooting a rifle is uncomfortable, and I shoot a lot and I practice a lot. But again, going back to, I don't know how many rounds today through my 308. Just happened what I happened to be shooting today. I would not have shot that same amount of rounds comfortably through a 300 Win Mag. So I can practice more, and I'm probably not super concerned about the recoil. And flinching is a real thing, whether you talk about handguns or rifles, and I think that might have a lot to do with it. One, they're going to practice less, perhaps because of either the cost or just the punishment, and it may cause them to develop a flinch. And even if that's kind of the thing about a flinch, is most people that flinch don't think that they flinch. And that really can cause issues. And that might be a big part of it. Again, these are my pontifications as to why. And after, those are the ones I posed in the chat, and I thought of one later, and perhaps this is the most forgiving of the theories. Maybe they just don't know. Maybe it's literally just they don't know, and they think because of whatever they've been told that they need some giant Magnum to shoot a deer. They think that more is always better, and they haven't ever felt the recoil of a high-powered rifle, and they just, on paper it looks great. On paper it looks like, oh, I'm launching a 150 grain bullet and a 150 grain bullet. Why wouldn't I launch it at 3,200 feet a second? Because on paper it looks like, well, why wouldn't I just get more? But there's no free lunch. That more comes with a price, and more is not always better. But that's another thing to consider. Maybe they just don't know, and they think somehow that extra couple hundred feet a second is going to make a difference. They don't consider all the downsides because they just don't have enough experience to realize that. And we've all been there. I've certainly been there. So those are some theories as to why. And again, this is not telling me what calibers you should get or shouldn't get. The 300 Win Mag is a fine caliber for some things. And if you decide you want a 300 Win Mag, then go with it. It's not a bad caliber. I'm just, if it does something for you that actually gives you an advantage over other calibers. Just like the 6.5 Creedmoor. I really like the 6.5 Creedmoor. One of my go-to guiding rifles is 6.5 Creedmoor and an ultralight mountain rifle. Because in a very, very lightweight mountain rifle, we're talking under 5 pounds, it has less recoil than the 308. And that's a real advantage to me. The fact that it has a little bit more drop than a 308, I don't care. Because the difference of the ranges that I like to spot and stalk and hunt and guide at, the difference is academic in that. But the difference in recoil is not academic. Going back to the 243, right? For deer, it's a fine caliber. It's a fine caliber. Don't think that somehow because somebody else is hunting deer with a 300 Win Mag, that you're any less capable of taking deer with a 243. Again, many of the guides that I knew that could hunt with anything, any caliber they wanted, right? Hunted with a 243. Because they knew if they made a good shot with a 243, the animal was down. And if they didn't make a good shot, whatever caliber they're shooting makes very little difference. I'm not going to say it makes no difference, but not much of one. And you can transfer this to tactical applications. You can transfer it to whatever you want. Does it apply to you? You're talking about like a lot of people, and the 6.5 Creedmoor is a great cartridge. Again, I really like it. In many ways, it is better than 308. But don't think that if somehow you really like your 308, and somebody tells you that 6.5 Creedmoor is a better long-range caliber, again, do you routinely shoot past 800 yards? Does that even matter to you? Maybe it does. And for you, at those very long ranges, it does make a difference. But talking about for most people, for most things, especially living east of the Mississippi, a lot of places, and there are some, but it's hard to get a range out past 500 yards, out to 1,000 yards. I'm not saying it doesn't apply to you, but before you run out, and unless you just want to spend a bunch of money, figure out if it actually matters. Don't just listen to marketing and ballistics hype. And that's kind of the point of this episode. You could transfer this to anything. Handgun rounds. I got to get a 10 millimeter for hog defense. Do you? Do you? Do you really need that? Look at some actual numbers and decide if you want. And 10 millimeter is a cool round. I like 10 millimeter. If you decide you want 10 millimeter, go for it. But don't do it just because somebody says or because marketing hype or whatever. Have you actually shot it on the clock or shot the handgun in 10 millimeter and see if you can actually hold it without having to adjust your grip? I love handgun shooting, you guys. If you listen to the bio, state pistol champion and regional. Anyway, I've won a lot of shooting competitions with a handgun, right? A lot of them were steel challenge, which is like drag racing with a handgun, super fast. A little uber small 10 millimeter that's really small and compact may look on paper like a really good carry gun. So you go out and shoot it and it feels like you got kicked in the hands by a mule. And you actually try on the clock to get some follow-up shots and realize every time you shoot it, you got to re-grip the pistol because it's halfway flown out of your hand. Nothing effective about that. And I'm not saying 10 millimeter is not a good round. It's a fine round. It's a really good round. But consider if it's actually better for you. Or if it's just marketing. And part of the reason that I think is valid why people carry certain rounds is confidence. They're confident in the round. And that's great. And I totally get that's a real thing. I am 100% with you. You should be absolutely confident in your gun and your round and your bullet selection. But you should be confident based on your actual experience or real world experience, not marketing hype. Not what somebody told you to try and get you to spend money to buy more stuff. Right? Who benefits? What's the reason behind it? So have confidence for the right reasons, not because of marketing. Anyway, if you couldn't tell by this episode, there is a reason why I don't have a bunch of sponsors. I don't want to be beholden to a bunch of sponsors and tell you to buy stuff that you don't need. I'm sure if you're listening to this, you probably buy gun stuff. But buy the stuff that you need, not the stuff that's being shoved down your throat. Buy stuff that's actually better and germane for your situation. If you appreciate this content and the hopefully not bribed and bought and paid for content like you get sometimes, that's all I'm going to say, consider supporting the show because that's how it's done. I give you the content and hopefully you find value in it and you contribute, right? It's about as honest an exchange as I can make it. Whatever commercials you hear they're put in by the host, whoever hosts this, which for my case is Spreaker, I don't have any say in that. I have no idea what commercials you hear and they're tailored to whatever your phone is. We don't even hear the same commercials. But as far as like sponsored content on this show, there isn't any. If you appreciate that, support the show. Become a patron. There's a lot of insider only Patreon content on there, like I talked about going to the range today. Just one example, I did a range report, a review of things shot and how they did and different rifles and different ammo and talked about different things that you're not going to hear unless you're a patron. You miss out on that content. And there's a lot of Patreon only content. So mostly if you appreciate the show and want to support it, but also if you want some of that insider-only content, consider becoming a patron. With that, we'll start wrapping up. The tactical tip of the day. I think I've mentioned this before, and I may have mentioned it recently, but I think it really is important on this episode as a tactical tip. Look for a good, cheap, used reloading manual. I don't care what brand, it doesn't really matter. I don't care if you reload or not. Even if you don't reload, get a good, cheap reloading manual because it will teach you a lot of honest numbers about ballistics. I think even though there's a lot of great resources, like I used online ballistics calculator with factory loads and stuff, if you're like me, there's just something different about having a book, a physical, tangible paper book in your hands to flip through and bookmark and look at this page versus that page and just There's something to that. And especially if you're talking about an older reloading manual, because they come out with them every so often, different manufacturers at different intervals. Unless you really care about a brand new round that came out this year, get one that's a couple years old. Most of the modern cartridges are going to be in there. So that's a tactical tip of the day. Just find an old reloading manual. eBay, a used bookstore, whatever. It is a great resource. Tactical verse of the day. For the word of the Lord is right, and all his work is done in truth. He loves righteousness and justice. The earth is full of the goodness of the Lord. Commentary. This earth is a beautiful reflection of God's mercy and love and power. Oftentimes, if you're out shooting, you'll be outside. Not all the time. Sometimes you're inside. But if you're outside, don't be so focused on the paper and such a tiny group that you don't step back and look around. I was out shooting in the mountains in the panhandle of northern Idaho today, up in the wilderness. Plenty of public land to go shoot on. Could see as far as I'd ever want to shoot, thousands of yards. But as much as I enjoy shooting, there's something to be said for taking a step back, taking your eyes off the target and looking around at the beauty of God's creation. All the earth proclaims and testifies to the power of God, the beauty of God, and the love of God. Let us not lose sight of that. Focused on such small and trivial things. Anyway, thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.